19 months ago, I bought my very first dog ever here in Italy. Tina, a border collie, has been a permanent part of our lives ever since. And honestly, through having her, I have learned so much, but especially so about what it's really like to be a first-time dog owner here in Italy, because there are some things that no one really talks about sometimes. So I'm going to share with you just what it's like and what no one will really tell you about owning a dog in this country, in case you're tempted to buy a dog or indeed you plan to move with a dog in the first place. Now, the first thing that really took me by surprise, I have to be honest, is just how friendly Italy is towards dogs in terms of allowing them into different shops and establishments. I have to be honest, I was not expecting dogs, for example, to be allowed into supermarkets. Tina is a frequent visitor of Conad. And actually, I need to make a correction because I said in a previous video that Sole 365, which is a supermarket here in the Campania region, doesn't allow dogs. Well, actually, now they do. And I've got a feeling perhaps it's more on an individual store basis as opposed to a national basis, because on their website it says that dogs are not allowed. But I've seen some Sole 365 stores recently with special dog carts. So I feel like this might be more of a regional decision. But I cannot believe that dogs can be allowed in some supermarkets here. It's a wonderful thing. Now, it goes without saying that depending on the shop or business, there will be certain restrictions put in place for the dog. So as I've mentioned before, in the supermarkets, in IKEA, we've taken her to IKEA, they have special trolleys that the dogs can stay in. Now, in the supermarket, it's mandatory. They have to be in the trolley at all times, whilst they are inside the store. In IKEA, you have options. They can either be on the leash and walk around independently, or they can be in the trolley. So again, it depends on the shop itself. But to have this level of kind of welcome towards dogs is a beautiful thing. And if you're in the UK now, because I know some of you are living in the UK and you're watching my content, update me, because I think times might have changed. But certainly when I lived in the UK, shops were not as friendly towards dogs as they are here in Italy. Now, there isn't a blanket law in the UK that says that dogs cannot enter shops, but it's more on a kind of individual basis that this is decided. But I remember seeing dogs tied up outside on the fences because they couldn't go into particular shops. I do think now, though, things are changing. I did some research before this video and I've noticed that quite a few more shops are starting to allow dogs to enter inside, but I still don't think it's as friendly a country towards dogs as it is here in Italy. Like, dogs are even welcomed in bars and restaurants. Now, bear in mind, some restaurants and bars might expect the dogs to stay in the outdoor seating area, but still, it's incredible that dogs can be so welcomed here. And I actually think it makes having a dog a much easier experience, because it means that Tina can come out with us a lot more and go to some of the same places that we go to, rather than having to stay at home because she's not allowed to enter. So I think it's a really, really beautiful thing. And, you know, like I say, it does depend on the store. Some say that the dog can come in on a leash but must have a muzzle on, for example. I know Leroy Merlin, which is like a DIY shop here, has this kind of rule. But it is this. Research the shops that you're interested in visiting just to understand what requirements they might have. But for a lot of businesses here, dogs are as welcome as humans are. And I think it's a really, really beautiful thing. And kind of leading into that is that having a dog is a really sociable thing here in Italy. And this is why I've said before that if you're struggling with loneliness in this country, or you are kind of needing to push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and meet new people, I honestly think having a dog, provided you have the means and ability to have it, of course, is one of the most beautiful things that you could do. Because there's something about walking with Tina. Everybody stops to talk to her, like people we know, people we don't know. She's like a little VIP. And it's lovely because people take such an interest in dogs here, like, you know, asking questions. And especially if they have a dog as well and the two dogs are playing together, you have an opportunity to strike up conversation with people that you don't really know. And that's a beautiful thing, because I've said it in a lot of videos and I'll link it up here, but making connections in this country, although it's incredibly vital, isn't necessarily easy to do at the beginning, because especially if you're trying to break into friendship circles or you live in a small town or village, like these kinds of places can be pretty closed to new people. And so you need to integrate yourself and find a way to enter into these circles so that you have the opportunity to make those connections. And I honestly think having a dog is a great way to do that. On that note though, if you are struggling to build connections here in Italy, I think you'll be interested in a brand new expat community that I'm in the middle of building at the moment, the Aperitivo Lounge. It's supportive, it's uplifting, and it's everything that you could ever want from a space where you're all going to be helping each other with your new life here in Italy and with your move to Italy in the first place. Go check out the waitlist. I'll link it up here so that you can find out more about this community. Numbers are going to be really, really limited because I want to keep this community intimate. So you'll want to get your name on the waitlist to be the first to know when it launches. But this is it. Dogs are a great way to meet people and a great way to leave the house and actually have an excuse to socialize. So in this way, it's a really wonderful thing to have a dog here in Italy. And kind of tied into that is the fact that dogs really are treated like an extension of the family, as if they're a child. Like the attention that dogs receive here, the way that people are so interested in the dogs here, and the love and attention they have for dogs is absolutely beautiful. And I think this just ties into everything that I've mentioned before as to why they're welcome in so many places, and as to, you know, the reason why it is such a sociable thing to have a dog and to go for walks with it. So it's a really, really beautiful concept, I think, and something that can enhance your life here in Italy. If you're on the fence about getting a dog in the first place, I think this is something to consider. Now, I will say that Vets bills are actually a lot cheaper here in Italy than I expected. Now, in the UK, vets bills can be pretty expensive. Well, everything's pretty expensive in the UK, let's be honest. But here in Italy, of course, it depends a lot on the breed of dog, any medical conditions, what has to be done to the dog itself. But if you have a dog of good health and there isn't anything major that you have to have done, a yearly jab, for example, now this is the same price I paid in Palermo as I have paid here in Salerno. A vaccine can be as little as €20. So this can be the yearly vaccine. It can be like a rabies vaccine. It could be like the vaccine against the mosquitoes, €20. I think that's pretty cheap. If you are living in another country, comment below and let's do a bit of a comparison. But I think that the vet's fees are pretty cheap here. Of course, you have pet food and things like this that you have to pay for as additional costs. That can vary depending very much on the type of food that you feed your dog and the brand. But we pay on average around €56 for a huge bag that lasts just over a month. So it's not bad at all, really. And it's this, I think, you know, that surprised me the most, because there is this kind of belief that if you have a dog, it's an expensive kind of animal to own and you're going to be paying a lot. And like I say, there are many caveats to this. It really does depend on your dog and the health it's in. But if you have a dog of good health, I don't think you end up paying that much, really, to be honest with you. I think things like surgeries and more advanced procedures are expensive here in Italy, but for your run-of-the-mill kind of checkups and vaccines, they're pretty inexpensive. So that's a huge plus point as far as I'm concerned anyway. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that with all of these advantages to having a dog here in Italy, that Italy just adores animals to the point where they would never ever think of harming them. But the reality, though, is somewhat different. And this is something that not many people really talk about, because there are laws in place to protect the welfare of dogs in this country. And with that come penalties and punishments if people are deemed to have abused their dogs or mistreated them in some way. However, I have to be honest with you, I read so many news stories this summer of people who had gone away on holiday, a week, 2 weeks, or however long it may have been, and they'd left their dog in the back garden of their home, chained to a wall with a bowl of water and food and just left it there, crying, barking, whatever it may have been doing for the whole time that they were on holiday. And I remember reading this story, and this person that had done this had quite a high profile job. They were like a teacher. So a responsible job, and you would expect they would have the same level of responsibility for their pet. But no, they were on holiday, and when the police contacted them, because the neighbours, of course, reported that this dog had been left on its own for a number of days, the woman was like, oh, I'm not back until like next week. Like, it's incredible. Italy is no different to any other country in the sense that there are people in this world who do not deserve the right to own a pet. Like, having a dog is like having a child in terms of the responsibility and love that it requires. And I think, if you want to have a dog, but you want to have this life where you're always traveling, you're always going away, you don't want to take your dog everywhere, then I think you should question your reasons for wanting to have this pet in the first place, because a dog is really not a toy. And I know that we say this all the time, like, even in the UK, I remember people saying a dog is for life, not just for Christmas, right? Because people forget this in the moment. They're like, oh, let's get a dog. And then they forget about all of the other responsibility that comes with it. But this kind of thing happens here, and it's not just a one-off thing. It happens on a very regular basis that people leave their dogs at home for extended periods of time, on balconies for extended periods of time in really high temperatures, and even if they decide to go on holiday. Now, it's not because there are not services available, because there are. We left Tina in the kennels, but I call it the dog hotel, when we went to the Palermo for the wedding at the beginning of September. And I'm honest in the sense that, I don't know, I didn't like leaving her, but she was in a proper place with, her personal space in an outdoor environment. Like, she was in the best possible place she could have been in at that time when we were away. I would never have dreamt to have left her at home, but people actually have this mindset here. And then not even that, but also people sometimes can't cope with the fact that they have this dog, and the reality dawns on them as to how much work is involved in actually having a pet. And you actually have a huge problem here in Italy of animals that have been abandoned. And you will find dogs roaming around small villages and towns without an owner because they've been abandoned, and also dropped off at shelters because the owners cannot cope with these dogs anymore. And you constantly see the appeals on social media from these shelters to try to find a new home for these dogs. And it just begs the question why people bother in the first place. I really think sometimes as well that dogs, for some people here in Italy, are like a business. You see that people breed dogs and sell the puppies, and it's like a business, but they're not necessarily thinking about the long-term consequences of what they're doing. And, people buy these dogs and don't really recognize what they're letting themselves in for, and then when it becomes too much, it's all too easy just to go and return it like you would a faulty product at the shop. And this is a huge problem here, and it's something that people don't really talk about, but it exists. There is a side of Italy that is very heartless towards dogs and towards the life that they deserve, and I think it's probably the same as it is in any other country. But it's like a huge paradox when you think of how loving and wonderful and accepting Italy is as a country on the other side of the picture, So this is really what it can be like having a dog here in Italy. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful experience. It's a huge responsibility. It's fantastic that so many places are accommodating for dogs so that you always feel like you can take your dog wherever you go. I will say though, when it comes to renting properties, this is where it can become more difficult if you have a dog, because not every landlord will want to have dogs in their property. And certainly we discovered this when we were searching for homes moving back from Palermo to the Salerno province, because it was the first time we were actually moving into a home with Tina. Even though we had her in our home in Palermo, there was nothing in our contract to say that we weren't allowed to have dogs, which is the whole reason we bought her in the first place. But when we were searching for a new home, we realised how many places were like, dogs are not welcome, no dogs. So it can be more difficult, I would say, having a dog if you are renting a property. So you do have to do your due diligence and make sure that they're accepted. But generally speaking, having a dog is a wonderful experience. You will, of course, come across people who don't know how to treat their their animals properly, and you'll read sad stories of dogs that have been abandoned or neglected. But on a whole, Italy is a country that really respects these animals, and it's a pleasure for me to have Tina in this country and to raise her in this country as well. So if you're thinking of moving to Italy with a dog, of course, you're going to need to do your research. Your dog will need some kind of a pet passport and ability to document vaccine history of the dog, because especially for things like the boats, I have to be honest with you, when we moved from Palermo back to the Salerno province, we took the boat because we had our car, and the restrictions imposed by the boat company were that Tina had to have a certificate from the vets to say that she was in good health, and that certificate had to be dated no later than 24 hours before the departure. And also we had to ensure that she had the rabies vaccination and all her vaccinations were up to date. Now, in reality, did they check any of those documents? No, they didn't. And I was a little bit unhappy about this because we had a cabin, and, you know, it's just like if they have this lax attitude, they could potentially be letting dogs onto their ships with like illnesses and stuff, but that's another story. But it's important that you do adhere to these, because you may get on a boat that actually does check the documents. So you need to make sure you've got everything in place, which is why if you're moving here with a dog, there's a few more things that you have to look into. But if you buy a dog here in this country, again, you're going to want to consider like the breeder, where you're buying it from. There are lots of different websites where people advertise dogs for sale here in Italy. And I would just say, do your due diligence, like research that website, research any reviews, and really kind of get a feel for the listing that you've looked at. And also, I would say, communicate with the breeder and ask for pictures, videos, more information. We did this for Tina. Tina was in a completely different part of Sicily to Palermo. I can't remember where we got her from now, but it was at least an hour to an hour and a half's drive away from Palermo, at least. But she was in a beautiful countryside location. We saw all her brothers and sisters and the mother, and it was lovely. And the owner was sending us videos and, you know, of Tina playing with her mother. I'll put one here actually so you can see, but it was lovely. And, you know, it gave us the confidence in that these dogs were being raised in the right way. And of course, you know, they have to have their chip as well. And this was included when we bought Tina, and we just transferred the name into ours. But there are so many things that you have to look into when you have dogs in here in this country, but really do your due diligence. Make sure that the dog you're buying is in good health as much as you know, has had like at least an examination by a vet before you purchase it, and also is microchipped. This is an advantage if you can buy the dog already with the microchip done. Otherwise, that's something that you will need to do later as well, and it's really advisable to do it too. There are associations here in Italy where if people fall on hard times and they can no longer afford to pay for an aspect of a dog's health or microchipping or things like this, they can offer reduced cost services to help people who might be in this situation. So there is a lot, but you've just got to do your due diligence and research. Having a dog here in Italy is a beautiful experience, but like anything, it can come with its ugly sides as well. So you definitely need to do your research, and most of all, embrace what a brilliant experience this can be. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you'll enjoy this one next, and I will see you in the next video.